From the nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors these broadcasts, now being seen on 122 stations across the United States of America. We're privileged to have as our guest for this broadcast Deng Chong, who has been the bureau chief of NTD TV in Washington, D.C. since the station was launched in March of 2002. As one of the area's first Chinese language newscasters, in 2001, Mr. Chong began producing and hosting the Weekly Economic Review, which has continued to be one of the few Chinese language world financial programs in the U.S., covering economic news from the U.S., Europe, and Asia with in-depth analysis of current economic issues emerging from the U.S. and China. Mr. Chong specializes in interviewing national scholars, writers, and politicians on China's issues of state, economics, foreign policy, and culture. His shows provide a public service to the community by offering a detailed view into the issues surrounding modern-day China. Calling upon his expertise as a producer and newscaster, Deng Chong launched Digging to China, something I did when I was a kid. I thought if I dug deeply enough in my backyard, I'd eventually make it to China, but I never got deep enough, so I wasn't able to test that theory. He was in Tiananmen Square at the time of that great unpleasantness some years ago. He was a student at the time. Why don't we begin by having you share with us your experiences in Tiananmen Square?
Sure. The whole incident started back in May when the General Secretary of the Communist Party, Hu Yaobang, died at that time. Back in April. And at that time, a lot of students are so angry and get upset because Mr. Hu at that time is a pro-democracy reformer.
I met his son on one of my visits.
Oh, you
to
did?
the Far East, I did.
Yes. And that upset a lot of Chinese students and intellectuals, so we want to have we want to set up some funeral services and memorial services to remember him. And that, and we try to organize the public activities to do that. But later on, and the Chinese government was upset about it, and they are kind of brand us as an anti-revolution, what is a very serious charge. And things leading all the way up to the May, and then they declared the martial law back in May 20th. And I was there. I was a sophomore student in the People's University of China in Beijing at that time. I was
How was it possible for you to develop a political perspective very different from that of the government?
Well, that at that time is 1989. We started to have economic reform for about 10 years at that time.
Because of Deng Xiaoping.
Yeah, because of Deng Xiaoping, and he said that the very famous motto from him is that getting rich is glorious. So, and we have the economic reform, but we do not have a political reform. And things kind of getting out of sync.
Totalitarianism.
Exactly. And we have started to develop a corruption at that time, and there is income disparity starting to showing up. There is a big discontent in the city because we started a reform in a rural area, and the city folks, they are not comfortable with that because they think they are left out. And most importantly, we think we shall launch a political reform. Let we share, get into the circle of the power.
To what degree was the Communist Party leadership aware of what you were doing?
Well, I believe they were fully aware of it, and that's why we want to have Mr. Hu Yaobang back into the power, because he was forced to resign back in 1986, because that time there was a small-scale students' demonstration happens in Beijing, in Shanghai, some big cities, and he was forced to resign at that time. And we were fully hopeful that he can be back into the position in 1989. And all of a sudden, he got a heart attack, and he died. And that upset, and that's the sparkling event that triggers the whole event back in 1989. and all the way up until the night of June 3rd. And I was at the Tiananmen Square at that time.
Were you physically injured during the uprising?
Well, I was not physically injured. I was just hit by a soldier with his the back
baton,
of his guns. Not baton, just the back of his guns. And I did not even realize that he hit me. And my friends told me he hit you. And then I was kind of ran away. And up until that time, I still do not believe that they will open fire to civilians, because it's just against my education. I never thought.
But they did.
Soldier. When I see people dying in front of me, I start to believe it. But until up to that moment, I did not believe that soldiers can open fire to civilians.
How many people, in your opinion, were killed?
Well, that remains a mystery because we do not have a full-scale survey at that time, and the government maybe know the full figure, but I doubt they released the real number. What I see with my own eyes, in a short period of time, about in 10 minutes, I saw about 5 people dying in front of me.
What were the officials aware of your participation in the protest?
I don't know.
So they didn't come after you personally following Tiananmen
No, I don't think so. I was not a student leader. I was just participating like hundreds of thousands of students did. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure that they know my specific participation is, but I'm just one of the so many students who are vehemently participate in this and have hopeful that we can change.
Tell me about your life after 1989. What did you do then?
Well, that night for me is a turning point in my life, because I believe I grew up from a boy to a man on that night, June 3rd. And I promised myself that I'm going to leave this country, and I probably will not come back until the China's regime changed the way they rule this country, which is to reign this country with the terror. So I decided to leave, and I was lucky, and I got admitted into a university in Virginia. And I came.
Which university was that?
Old Dominion University.
Yes, very fine
and
school.
I came in next year in April 1990.
And so you've lived in the United States since then?
Yes, I lived in the United States since then.
How did you become involved in television?
Well, that is a long story, and because I experienced in the Tiananmen demonstration and the massacre, and I was kind of giving up all my hopes and dreams, and I would just like to live a pleasant life in the United States, which I can, because I was lucky again to catch the .com boom. I find a new job, I get married, I have 2 children, and I say, well, I can live a comfortable life, in this country, and that's exactly what I intend to do. And in 1997, somebody introduced me to Falun Gong, which is a spiritual movement.
Are you a member of Falun Gong?
Yes, I am. And somebody introduced me to Falun Gong, and even though I live in this country, and I always are very fond of traditional Chinese culture, and maybe I think I'm getting old, so I was looking for and searching for a spiritual path for my life.
Why is the government so concerned about Falun Gong, which really just repeats traditional practices?
Exactly.
Exercise, so forth.
Falun Gong, when you look at it, it's very simple. 5 sets of exercise and a principle of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. It's a political group, right? But in China, any civil group with the most benevolent intentions can be viewed by the Chinese government with suspicion.
Anything that's organized.
Anything, yes, anything. If you set up a birdwatch organization in China with 50,000 members and you get together on a regular basis, you can be, and the government will view you with a suspicious eye. And Falun Gong was very, very popular back in China at that time. And based on the Chinese Security Services survey back in 1998, they found out Falun Gong has 70 million members, which was more than the Communist Party memberships.
Do you believe that's true?
Yes, because it is surveyed by the Security Service at that time. And Falun Gong is an organization.
70 million members.
70 million members. 70 million members.
What impact does that have on the government's policies?
Well, if you ask me, I would say it is no impact, because this is a group of people who get together to practice like a Tai Chi style practice every morning. does not impact on the government policy. But one thing that impacted government policy, I should say, is that time the Premier Zhu Rongji himself, and because Chinese government was kind of wary about Falun Gong, and they did a survey trying to find out what's going on. And one effect of the practice in Falun Gong is you're getting very healthy. And a lot of people, their disease kind of disappeared after they practiced Falun Gong. So that time, Premier Zhu Rongji said, hey, it's good. We don't have that much burden of the social, like a Medicaid and Medicare, because so many retired people, they don't have any disease, and they are getting healthy, so they do not add any burden for the government. So it's a good thing. So I would say, if you ask me that I think it's an impact of government policy, which is a positive way. But the president at that time, Jiang Zemin, I believe he was jealous about so many people following the Falun Gong teaching, and a lot more Falun Gong members than the Communist Party members.
Does Hu Jintao feel the same way as Jiang Zemin?
That I don't know. I do not have enough information to draw a conclusion on that. But as far as I know, it was the Jiang Zemin himself in the political bureau. He is the one that single-handedly launched this campaign to crack down on Falun Gong. Right.
Now, what about the government in Taiwan? What is their attitude toward Falun Gong?
Well, in Taiwan, they encourage the freedom of religious belief, and it's a democratic country. And Falun Gong, they just act as any democratic government will be, just let you be.
So they do not involve them. They're not concerned about Falun Gong.
No, they were not. And as a matter of fact, Falun Gong was very popular in Taiwan.
We're going to take a break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We'll learn more about what's happening in Communist China, and we'll talk a little bit about the upcoming Olympics. Stay with us. One of the top leaders in the Communist Chinese military declared that the United States is the main enemy of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the People's Republic of China, which is longhand for what we call China. We have been building up our enemy, if that is a reciprocal term, by giving them most favored nation status and membership in the World Trade Organization. Last year alone, that gave them an $84 billion advantage in money which is fungible. And as a result of the extra money they have, they're not only taking jobs from the United States, they're increasing their military budget by 17% a year. It's time to stop sending technology and dollars to Communist China.
The Conservative Caucus, www.conservativeusa.org or 703-938-9626.
Find out how you can support freedom in China, protect your family from poisoned food and products from China, and save American jobs. Go to conservativeusa.org for information and actions you can take. This has been a public service of the Conservative Caucus.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips with my special guest, Deng Chong, who is with NTD TV. Now, what do those initials stand for on your television station?
NTD stands for New Tang Dynasty, and
Explain
Tang Dynasty. That. Well, Tang Dynasty is the China's most powerful and prosperous period of time. It's about 1,500 years ago, and
1,500.
Yeah, 1,500 years ago, and we hope that we can restore that glory with our name called the New Tang Dynasty.
And what was so good about the Tang Dynasty?
Well, militarily, it's very strong, and then more importantly is the cultural. It is very diversified at that time. At that time, the Christians first introduced in China, and the Buddhism is prosperous in China, and there's a lot of other cultural coming to the China. And Tang Dynasty, China at that time, it's very much like the United States today. Yeah. A lot of foreigners live in China.
Now, Falun Gong, is there a religious coherence? Buddhism, Christianity, Confucianism, Is there a common religious faith among Falun Gong members?
Well, Falun Gong is a new, I would say it's a new spiritual faith. And of course, it has some similarities to the Taoist and the Buddhism. And Falun Gong book has been translated to so many languages. I believe it's at least 25 languages. And
really?
When you read it, yeah, because it has a lot of similarity to traditional Chinese culture. But Falun Gong spiritual belief itself is a new one. It's different.
Now let's talk about something that will soon be upon us.
Right.
And that is the Olympic Games in China. What is the attitude of Falun Gong toward the Olympics? Do you encourage people to attend the Olympics? Do you think it should be boycotted? Is it an occasion for protesting the regime? What do you think ought to happen?
Well, first of all, I cannot speak of Falun Gong as a group. I'm just can say what my think is, and I do not think boycotting is a good thing, and I think the China should mean what they say when they promised back in 2001, and they said during the Olympic game, and they are going to grant the freedom of press to foreign journalists at that time. And I believe this is a period of time that the international community should open their eyes wide open on China and to report truthfully and objectively, to tell us, to portray a true picture of China. I think this is a good opportunity, but unfortunately there is no real freedom of press in China.
Well, they just issued a rule book of do's and don'ts, what you can do if you attend the Olympics.
Right.
Have you seen that?
Well, I haven't read that, but pretty much I know what
it's pretty
that
restrictive.
Is. Oh, yeah.
And they do not encourage people to be critical of anything they see.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
Of course not. And back in the beginning of last year, that's the time that China's regime promised we have freedom of press from January 1st, 2007 to October 2008. At that time, in my program, I claimed that I predict it won't be true.
Human rights problems seem to be on the ascent. They seem to be rising.
Right, and on the contrary, what the China's regime promised, they will improve human rights, and the condition is getting worse because they want to showcase the Olympic game to the world. So they have actually, the human rights is getting worse because they do not want the dissidents use this kind of opportunity to make a splash.
Is there a significant Falun Gong presence in Tibet?
I don't think we have a significant presence in Tibet.
Has the Dalai Lama said anything about Falun Gong?
Well, I do not have enough information because I do not pay too much attention on what Tibetan people say about Falun Gong. But most of the time, they support our cause because it's universal human rights, freedom of religious belief.
What dangers are faced by Americans who attend the Olympics as tourists? Could they be made subject to arrest if they protest something the Chinese government is doing?
Well, I would very much think they would be subject to arrest if they openly protest for any human rights cause in China during the Olympic Games. And
do you think it's a good idea that President Bush plans to attend the opening ceremonies?
Well, it's a big question. I hope I can have enough time to explain it. And Olympic game in China is a big thing. It's a really, really big thing. It's a big thing for the Chinese government. Also, it's a big thing for the Chinese people. And ever after Mao died, communism died with him. And there is no ideology in China anymore after he died.
Even with Zhou Enlai?
No. But in history, Chinese rulers always need to find an ideology to show they have legitimacy with an official orthodox. So
the
after
mandate
communism,
from heaven.
Right. So after communism, what is left? And very naturally, they pick nationalism. Okay. And if you go to China, you can see China today is dotted with what they call the patriotic education center. And for example, if you travel from Hong Kong to Guangzhou, and you can see a museum showing that China lost Opium War to Britain. And if you go to the northeast part of China, you can see the museum showcasing how Japanese soldiers tortured Chinese citizens, partisans back in 1931. And because there's a museum showing that Japanese soldier blew up a railway and used that excuse to invade China. And if you go to the Nanking, of course, you will see a museum about the Japanese, they committed mass massacre in Nanking at that time. Now, this is tailored by the Chinese government to have this kind of patriotism education. Rather than celebrate the high points of the Chinese civilization, the 5,000 years Chinese civilization, and the emphasis here falls entirely on the collective sense of victimhood. And this injured sense of victimhood is so deep that for Chinese people, for we Chinese people, it's impossible for us to view ourselves as aggressors. All right? So,
so in other words, you're simply defending yourself against the assaults of others.
Right. And the key here is, all right, with so much official patriotic education, and the implication here is this. China, for China to be powerful again, there must be a resurgence of Chinese greatness, of a show of China's power, of a restoration of pride among all peoples. Now, the subtle implication here is these are all led by Chinese Communist Party. You know, this is kind of, I would call them a spin, and they spin this official patriotism to glue that the nationalism and the patriotism with the party together. And they portray themselves as the only legitimate leader can lead China back to the past glory.
So in other words, they equate patriotism and nationalism with the success of the Central Committee of the Communist Party.
Exactly. And this is something that's very difficult for Chinese people to identify. And all Chinese people love China. I love China, but I'm not fond with the Communist Party. You know, and but Chinese Communist Party.
How many members are there in the Communist Party?
In the Communist Party, it's about 65 million.
Fewer than Falun Gong.
Right. That's why in the first part and the first half I said they were jealous because
we have to take a break.
People.
When we come back, I want to ask you about the impact of the recent disruptions, the geological disruptions in China. I noticed that the Chinese government is saying that if your one child was killed in the disruptions, you can have another child. I'd like you to talk about the one-child policy when we get back. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Mr. John.
Find out how you can support freedom in China, protect your family from poisoned food and products from China, and save American jobs. Go to conservativeusa.org for information and actions you can take. This has been a public service of the Conservative Caucus.
The very first clause in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 1, immediately following the preamble, asserts that all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States consisting of a Senate and a House of Representatives. All legislative powers, that means you cannot give other entities the power to legislate, not the United Nations or the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund or the federal judiciary or regulatory agencies or federally funded private organizations. If you're going to stick to the Constitution, only the Congress can make policy, and the Conservative Caucus works to assure that Congress will more nearly conform to the Constitution.
The Conservative Caucus, www.conservativeusa.org, 703-938-9626.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, Chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors Conservative Roundtable. If you're interested in the kinds of issues we discussed on Conservative Roundtable, please check out our website, www.conservativeusa.org. If you want to receive information about our work, fax us your name and address at 703-281-4108, or drop us a line at 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia, 22180. That's TCC at that address. And our guest, Mr. Chong, has a program on NTD TV, which is available on public access in Falls Church, and it's broadcast by satellite into Communist China. Now, given the recent earthquake and the complaints of so many Chinese parents about the poorly structured buildings for schools, in which many children died, and given the fact that there was a one-child policy in China, what's happening now? May parents now conceive more children, God willing?
Well, there's a policy, or there's a talking about passing a new policy for those parents who lose their only child in the earthquake. They could have another one, but most of the parents are in the middle-aged, and what they care the most is to investigate why the building was so poorly built. But looks like the government is prohibiting doing that, and they sent 5,000 policemen into the earthquake zone. Is not to maintain the stability, but to make sure that no such report will leak out.
5,000 policemen,
right,
as part of an official government cover-up.
Exactly.
How many families disobey the one-child policy in the PRC?
Well, I don't have accurate number to tell you, but from my two brothers' experience, for them, raising one child is expensive enough, so they don't intend to have another child. But for the people living in the countryside, labor is very important, so they try their best to disobey the policy. And this is why I say this one-child policy is a bad policy. It's very brutal, because the local government, the local official, they use this as a cash machine, as an ATM, to find the people and to make a lot of money, because if you get
so in other words,
child,
if you have more than one child, you're fined?
You're fined.
What
yes.
else do they do?
Well, you find you rip off a lot of privileges, such as the schools and a lot of other things.
But they don't kill the children?
They don't kill the children after you were born.
But they may sterilize the...
Exactly.
Thank you for being with us,
and
thank you for joining us on Conservative Roundtable.